Thank you, and thank you all so much for coming to this presentation. I really appreciate it. I appreciate each and every one of you taking time out to come to this, because I think it's quite an important subject, and I think it's a study that hasn't been done by anyone as yet. You know, it's a longitudinal study, and saying that, it's been over 6 years really studying. I mean, I've been collecting data for about 4 or 5 years, but it's been a longitudinal study, and it's not only ethnographic, which I'll explain later, but it's also auto-ethnographic, meaning that it's a journey within myself. So I don't think anyone has done this study, and I hope to contribute a lot to the movements through my findings, and also some of the insights I've gained. Now, before I start, I must warn you that, you know, due to the nature of the subject, you know, asking why environmental movements tend to be so predominantly white, means that at some points I will, you know, say some things that might make you feel uncomfortable, and it might unhinge you a bit, unhouse you, and so on. In many ways, I kind of don't apologize for that, because it is only being through uncomfortable that we can actually move forward. It's only through challenging ourselves that we move forward. So as movements, I mean, everything I say and do is driven by love for the movement, love for the people, love for planet. So that's what I come here with. I must also warn you that I don't have answers, but what I do hope is to give you some insights that will help us all better understand why there are these disjunctures between different groups in terms of coming together to fight what we might deem to be a common cause. Now, last thing I'd say before I start is that this presentation would normally be in 2 parts. So, of course, you know, trying to present something that I've been studying for so long, over 6 years, within an hour or 2 hours, it's just not enough. You'll get snippets of a lot of the parts that I've used. And also, what I normally do is have a follow-on workshop, which is a 2-hour session that delves a bit deeper into my research findings themselves, and then ask certain questions, and is very participatory in that respect. So that being said, I think I shall make a start. So the roadmap for the presentation, very quickly, I start, when I normally go to presentations of this sort, they're normally in academic settings, I have to say, but they don't normally give the background to the presentation or to the research, and I often find myself quite disappointed, because you want to understand, or I want to understand, you know, what has been going on, you know, how the researcher has been thinking, and what are the reasons why they've chosen to do that research, or the way they've interpreted their results and findings. So I start with the journey to the research. I'm going to go through this very, very quickly if I can, and then I go to a bit of the background to the research, which is almost the intellectual roots of the research, the academic sort of quandary that that provoked me to do the research. And then I look at the problem that underpins the research. And then I very, very, very briefly talk about the theories that I use. I mean, we're not really here for theories. I know the main part that you're here for is to talk about my findings and my analysis and reflections and so on. Anyway, following the theory, I just talk very briefly about my methodology. So in a way, it's to present a pedigree of the research, just to show you that, you know, this is the amount of work that has gone into it, and therefore the insights that I bring are cushioned by, or are driven by, some form of integrity. Yeah. Then I offer the findings, followed by a brief analysis and some reflections thereafter. And then hopefully after the reflections, we can have a conversation, you know, with some questions and discussions. Yeah. Okay, so sitting comfortably, here we go. So my research, well, I'll start with this quote from Doug Hammarskjöld. Doug Hammarskjöld was the second UN Secretary General, and he was, I think, well, still is the youngest to have held that position. Unfortunately, he died in a plane crash when he was 47 or so, so very young. But I think this quote is really, really pertinent to this journey that I've been on. And it's just the longest journey is the journey inwards. And my journey started, let's say, 2008, during the financial crisis. the financial crash, the housing bubble crash, and so on and so forth. At the time, I was running a bar, restaurant, nightclub in East London and making lots and lots of money, and then everything crashed and, decided to move on. 2010 to 2012, we had so many uprisings in the world. We had the Arab Spring. On the left here, we have Egypt, Tahrir Square. Then we have Tunisia, we have Yemen here, and also Syria. Now, of course, Yemen and Syria are still in a bit of tumult. We also had Los Indignados going on in Spain, and that was a youth uprising, very much driven by students rebelling against the austerity measures that were imposed upon them. So, social movements were becoming really, really important. And of course, we had the Occupy movement, which was so fantastic. And I thought at that time that, if the world is going to change for the better, then it's going to be through social movements. Anyway, so in 2012, I wanted to understand better, better how the world ran, how developments worked, and how the global systems operated within each other. Okay, why isn't this button working? So I went to the development planning unit at University College London, and I went to study environment and sustainable development. Now, as part of that study, we went in 2013 to Lima, and Lima was Lima in Peru, a beautiful, beautiful country, beautiful city. And what really struck me was that Lima branded itself as a Ciudad para Todos, which means city for all. So I thought that was very interesting. How can a city be for all? I mean, anyway, so this some vista of Lima, and it's pretty much a modern city. The metropolitan district is very, very modern. It could be anywhere in Europe, for example. Absolutely beautiful. And as I said, it's branded itself as a city for all, which I thought was fantastic. Now, I was part of a group in Lima, working just on the outskirts of Lima, 17.5 kilometers from the center of Lima. We went to this self-managing urban community called Huaycan, and it's had 90,000 people living there at the time. Now, what interested us, and Satya, who's on this call, was part of it, what interested us in terms of research in Lima was who had a right to the city. I mean, what was happening, the picture you see, it's a lot of people migrating from the rural hinterlands, trying to get access to the city, to stake a claim to the city, to get a better life for. Now, I have a quote at the bottom here, and that is, the question is not what you look at, but what you see, and that's by Henry David Thoreau. He's a very interesting person. If you do get some time, please do some research on him. He writes about civil disobedience. He wrote about environmentalism, and he was also an abolitionist, which I thought was quite interesting. Very, very interesting character. So I became very interested in cities. We were looking at how people got access to water, and Huaycan, where the picture you saw before, was a self-managing community. So what I saw was people coming together and fighting for their rights, not just to get water, but also to live in what seemed to be almost an uninhabitable place. Now, Lima is the second largest desert in the world, apart from Cairo in Egypt. And so these people were trying to get access to the city, and what we saw them do was try to almost tame the land, tame the desert. So they were trying to grow trees and so on and so forth to stop the rock falls that often besiege them. I have this quote here from Robert Park from 1967, and this kind of focuses minds on why I'm so interested in cities. So the city is man's most consistent and, on the whole, his most successful attempt to remake the world he lives in more after his heart's desire. But if the city is the world which man created, it is the world in which he is henceforth condemned to live. Thus, indirectly and without any clear sense of the nature of his task, in making the city, man has remade himself. So this really spurred me on to write, when we got back from Lima, about the right to the city. The questions I was asking myself was, who has a right to the city? Because what became apparent whilst we were there was that, obviously, like any city in the world, people who had money appear to have more of a right to the city than those who didn't. So I based my writings, my dissertation on a concept called the right to the city, which was by Henri Lefebvre, the chap here on your left, on the left where the cursor is. And he said the right to the city is a superior form of rights. So it's not like any form of human rights, for example. It's the right to participation and appropriation. And for me, one of the most important things about this concept of the right to the city is that it provides a super frame, a superordinate frame, a master frame for various movements to come together. So I thought that was very interesting. So David Harvey tells us that the right to the city is a collective right rather than an individual right, since changing the city inevitably depends upon the exercising of collective power. And this, I think, the whole notion of collective power and a collective right is what runs through my thinking when I did the research. My research. The right to the city has been taken up by various cities around the world. Some in Brazil, for example, Porto Alegre, and also Mexico City, for example. And how it is interpreted is to enhance participatory democracy. So citizens within the city generally have a right to how the city is planned, how the budget is spent, and so on. And I thought that was very, very interesting. It's not quite revolutionary enough for me, but it is a way of moving forward. So then the quandary that I began to face was how can we best construct an environmentally sustainable and socially just city? And this quandary was further triggered by this book, Just Sustainabilities by Julian Agerman, Robert Bullard, and Bob Evans. And within that book, there's a chapter by Andrew Dobson, and Dobson's argument, and this is stemming from 3 years of research, I think based in Germany. And his argument was that social justice and environmental sustainability, never the twain shall meet. I have come to the reluctant conclusion that social justice and environmental sustainability are not always compatible objectives. Assertions to the contrary are more often, I think, based on wishful thinking than a clear-sighted analysis or hard empirical evidence. I want you to try keep that in mind in terms of when you're listening to what I'm saying, because part of the problem I think we have in trying to merge social justice issues with environmental sustainability issues is exactly what Dobson talks about in this paper. By the way, his book is available online. It's called, it's free, Justice and the City. Sorry, Justice and the Environment. Okay, so what we need to do in order to try and bring these two concepts together, environmental sustainability and social justice, is to create an overarching framework that will help us analyze the relationship between environmental sustainability and social justice. And the best way, suggests Dobson, is to construct the framework analytically separately in the context of sustainability and justice. Okay, so how did I frame the problem? Coming from an environmentalist perspective, this is what this is how I framed it. More than 5 decades after Rachel Carson's landmark publication, Silent Spring, exposed the perilous effects of persistent pesticides, particularly DDT, on the natural world, the persistent use of synthetic agrochemicals in industrial agriculture continued to disrupt and decimate biodiversity around the world. More than 4 decades after a coterie of scientists published Limits to Growth, which warned that if serious aversive action was not taken in regard to resource and environmental depletion, then humanity would face overshoot and collapse in the economy, the environment, and population before 2070. Recent data clearly shows that the world is tracking remarkably close to the tipping points linked to business as usual, as predicted in Limits to Growth. Now, more than 3 decades after Our Common Future came out, that's the World Commission on Environment and Development, which gave us the concept of sustainable development. More than 3 decades after that came out, unsustainable trends in development persist globally. And more than 2 decades after the Rio Summit, one acknowledged that unsustainable patterns of consumption and production were the primary cause of environmental deterioration. Unsustainable trajectories of extractivism, production, and consumption continue to degrade the source and sink capacities of our planetary ecosystems. Now, finally, since the Paris Climate Agreement was signed in 2016, it is interesting to know that 33 global banks have to date invested 1.9 trillion in fossil fuel industry projects. The pattern is patently unrelenting. Plus ça change, plus la même chose. So what we have then in terms of framing the problem is that we've exceeded lots of planetary boundaries, and this is the problem that we face right now. In fact, out of 9 planetary boundaries identified by Johan Rockström and Will Steffen and about 15 other scientists, we've exceeded 4 of them, and that's climate change, biodiversity loss, the addition of phosphorus to nitrogen, and also deforestation. Now, I must state at this point that I couch my analysis of this within industrial agriculture. So the food system is very important to me within the research, but I'm not obviously going to go into that now. So,
Nick, sorry,
yeah.
just 2 sets. There's someone, Monica.
Yeah.
Bernard, have you invited her?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Okay, I'll let her in. Great.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay. So looking at the planetary boundaries that we have crossed, it's obviously very clear that we are destroying the Earth, and the basis of destroying the Earth is, of course, that the indicators of growth are premised on GDP, gross domestic products, and as long as GDP, we look at GDP as the marker of progress, we will keep extracting from the environment and also inputting into the environment the entropy that we produce. What that tells us, because we're destroying the Earth, that all life is at risk. Yeah. So ultimately, as environmentalists, our point of departure is that all lives matter. Okay, I'll come back to that obviously a bit later. So now we have a problem, and obviously, with the more than 50 years scenario sequence that I spoke about there, if we wait for governments to act, it will be too little, too late. If we act as individuals, it will be too little. But if we act as communities, it might just be enough, just in time. And of course, that comes from our favorite thinker in this movement, Rob Hopkins. But the question then becomes, we who? Who are we talking about when we say we? Social movements, which is of course what we are, have a prophetic sense, and that is to say, they operate in complex societies and are disenchanted prophets, so to speak. Movements are a sign that's not merely an outcome of the crisis. They are the last throes of a passing society. So once you see movements happening, once you see uprising, once you see mobilizations, you know that something is taking place. But the nature and form of that, of the outcome is not necessarily known by all the movements. And indeed, we are part of this. We are a prefigurative movement. That means we're trying to shape the future in that respect. So we are very much a prophetic movement. Yeah. So like the prophets, movements speak before they speak to announce what is taking shape, even before its direction and content have become clear. So I then look at a brief sketch of social movements, throughout time, which have been drivers of change. And in order to understand the world that we live in today, I think, you'll do well to look at the influence of social movements, from abolitionists to civil rights and the Occupy movements, which I spoke briefly about, to ourselves, and of course, climate strike and Extinction Rebellion. Social movements have always played an integral role in changing societies. So social movements are very important, and I obviously believe in them. There are different types of social movements. Social, political, and also we can typologize them by the sphere of influence that they seek to impact. So we have national and transnational movements. We have some local movements, but we as the transition movements are what's can be understood as a global movement. So we're a global movement. That means we have local chapters, and what the local chapters do is act on issues within the locality but also have an eye on the global outcomes as well. And local movements very much are attached to place. They have a sense of place, a sense of locality, a sense of the culture, the history, the economics, the people within any given place. And another way of typologizing social movements is the amount of change that they pursue and who is changed by their action. So, for example, we have alternative social movements, reformative, redemptive social movements, and revolutionary social movements. Now, I would argue, and I have said this before, that transition appears to be a reformative social movement. It means, meaning it wants sort of reform of the existing system, but I have argued that no, it's actually a revolutionary social movement to actually change the system for the better, and that is really our ambition. The question, of course, still remains: who will shape that future? Who will shape the world that we're seeking to? And that becomes problematic. We know, we always say another world is possible, and of course, that is the question. That becomes problematic when we realize that environmental movements such as ours and Extinction Rebellion and almost all environmental movements, new social movements, new environmental movements since Rachel Carson, Rachel Carson sort of inspired new social movements, so to speak. But all the movements that have come about since then, over 50, 60 years, the environmental movements have been predominantly white, and a few newspaper headlines sort of capture it here. So then that becomes a problematic. The problematic is the main question that I'm asking, but a problematic also contains a constellation of other questions that need to be answered in order to address the main problem. So my problematic is, why are environmental groups so predominantly white? And attached to that, I asked 4 different questions. The first question is pretty much the primary question put in a different way. In what ways does social identity and, by extension, social location intersect with collective action in local environmental movements such as transition? And second question I ask is, why does inclusion and diversity matter for the transition movement? Now, that is what perhaps one could call well, that question is really to establish an original position. What's John Rawls, who's considered to be sort of the father of writings on justice. He wrote a theory of justice. What's John Rawls calls a veil of ignorance. So I wanted to find out, as transition members, participants, why inclusion and diversity matter to them. I just wanted to see the breadth of their thinking. Third question was, and this is, one that's I think concerns everyone here, perhaps more than any of the other questions, is how can transition, or TTB, which is Transition Town Brixton, better engage with racially marginalized groups to help build solidarity across differences? And then following that, my last question is, what can transition, or TTB, Transition Town Brixton, learn from other movements past and present? So we have said that another world is not only possible, or Arundhati Roy says another world is not only possible, but it's on their way. And I couch my research in social movement theory. So looking at social movement since about 1965. And I very much look at start with collective action theory by Manker Olsen. And his hypothesis, or his thesis, was that whenever rational people will not join social movements, that was his contention. And he said, particularly if they're fighting for a common good. Yeah, so a common good is obviously environmental sustainability is a common good. So his argument was that people would not join a movement if their not joining would not affect, their rewards from that movement. Moving on, resource mobilization theory looks at the resources available to movements, and again, I look at that. I look at all these in quite a bit of detail within the research, but as I said at the beginning, this is not really for this presentation, so I won't speak too much about it. Political process theory or political opportunity structures looks at the zeitgeist or the political opportunities within a time when a social movement emerges, and what propels the emergence of that social movement, and also the sustaining of that social movement. Relative deprivation theory is well, it's exactly as it says. Really, it concerns that people come together, form movements when they're deprived of something. So again, we can relate this to Black Lives Matter, for example. So there's an absence of justice, and that's why people come together. And then new social movement theory very much encapsulates pretty much all the new environmental movements of today. So ourselves, as transition movements, and also Extinction Rebellion will be considered, or Fridays for Future will be considered as new social movements. Very quickly onto my methodology. So I obviously chose Transition Town for my study, and I chose Transition Town Brixton as my particular case study. And well, we're all part of transition, so I don't really need to go through this. But I think what really attracted me to transition as a proposition in terms of changing or influencing how change in the world came about was that transition offered something completely different to other social movements. So as opposed to raging against the machinations of the global system, like other movements do, like XR, for example, has done and is doing so successfully, transition offers solutions. And I think solutions are a more attractive proposition for those who do not want to go join the front lines. And within that, the framing of providing solutions, it was the positive visioning aspect of transition really that attracted me to join the movement in the first place, and then research after. And yeah, there are various sort of analysis of transition that we all, I think, possibly know. Within transition towns around the world and localities, we will find all different types of initiatives happening, from energy production to farming, urban agriculture, business economics or re-economy projects as we have in Brixton, food, and transition has always linking to various other movements, or linking to permaculture, or the concept of permaculture, which of course germinated transition in Rob's thinking. Social justice or diversity and issues of justice have always been very important. So it was testing to see, I wanted to test out to see how transition was engaging with social justice and issues of inclusion and diversity. So why did I choose Brixton for my study? Okay, I chose Brixton because I have a long and deep personal history with Brixton. I've been going to Brixton for over 20-25 years. And it's a history really grounded with music, and I also really love the vibe, the multicultural nature of Brixton. It's such a vibrant place. It always feels a bit on the edge as well. So although I've never lived in Brixton, in many ways Brixton has lived in me for a very long time. Another reason why I chose Brixton was, well, I was already a member of Transition Town Brixton, so it made sense really to study it. And also Brixton was that inner city district, and I thought this was really where I could challenge the concept of transition, because cities are the sites for a lot of developmental disorders within the world. There are a lot of where pollution is produced, a lot of waste, and so on and so forth. But if we could crack the nut of transition in cities, I think we will go a long way to sort of sorting the world out, so to speak. And as I said, I chose Brixton because it's so vibrant, multicultural, and it's a beautiful place. If you haven't been, if you ever come down to London, please give me a call and I'll take you around. And Something else about Brixton is that it's had significant uprisings, 4 major ones anyway, in 1981, 85, 95, and 2011. And all these uprisings were based really on interactions with authorities, interactions with police. So it was really a social justice issue. I will touch on that a bit later. I will expand on that a bit later. So the aims of Transition Town Brixton raise awareness within the community. This would Transition Town Brixton since 2008 raise awareness within the community, local businesses, local authority. We work very well with the local authority in many of our projects. And to deal with the issues of climate change. And we've always got peak oil there, but of course the arguments about peak oil have somewhat subsided because eco-modernism, there's now fracking and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, there seems to be more oil in the world and almost cheaper than at any other points at the moment. We also seek to change behaviors within, or try to influence behavior change within the community and also local businesses and local authority. And we try as best as we can to engage the whole community, but we have had some successes and quite a lot of failures, but we don't stop trying. And part of our aim also is to train and reskill members of the community for more localized projects. So, for example, Brixton Energy, one of our energy projects, there's now a localized version of that, which is Lambeth Community Solar, and that's really sort of takes perhaps unemployed people or people from the estates and trains them in terms of installing solar panels and so on. We try to raise and generate funds. It's often very difficult. So, for example, the Transition Bounce Forward seed funding at the moment is so welcome to some of the projects we want to pursue. And as Brixton, we always try to pioneer projects. Yes, as I said before, some of them fail, but it doesn't stop us from trying, and we always try. We have tried for a couple of years now to start a local bank. The Bank of Lambeth. It's on a bit of a back burner at the moment because we're so stretched, but it's something that we will still try. It's a massive undertaking. It's very ambitious, but we hope to do it. So, as I said, these are some of the successes we've had in Brixton. Our re-economy projects, which helped the Brixton Pound, and Brixton Pound was very successful. Unfortunately, we've just lost the Brixton Pound Cafe, which was a real community hub, and what we're doing there was using food that will be thrown away. And it was the first cafe in London where you pay what you feel. We have the Remakery projects, and it's just, we're doing quite well, but we can do a lot better. So moving on to my data collection. Data collection was from about 2015 to 2018. And as I said before, I used an ethnographic approach for the study. And that meant being part of the community, embedding myself within the community, not just the community of Brixton, but also the community of activists. And, I was, going to all the meetings, and, I've become one of the directors of TTB as well. So, we're always planning together. I use the mixed methods approach, so I look for quantitative data and also qualitative data, and used interviews and surveys as well, and participants' observations and interviews of transition members, and that was 86 over the period of those 3 years. And I used semi-structured and unstructured interviews of participants and community members, and I did 432 of them. In fact, I've done a lot more since then because it never seems to stop. And I did surveys of residents in their homes as well, and local businesses, and also looked at, transition. It's amazing the amount of literature on transition. It's just fantastic, how prophetic of Rob, and to start it, sorry. So the picture up here is one of our open project night meetings. We used to have them every fortnight, and then it went monthly and so on. And down here we have a festival in Lambeth. Every year we have the Lambeth Country Show, and I collected a lot of data there. So I have on purpose not included my absolute findings here, because that would take a very long time, as I said, to present this. And I also use it as part of a workshop, a separate workshop that I would normally give, following this presentation. A synopsis of the findings were that there were the way TTB was perceived, or the problems that we had. Number one was issues of communication. Only 9% of over 600 people that I spoke to had, heard of Transition Town Brixton in the first place. So we have a real communications problem, and I think that probably resonates with a lot of other transition towns. I mean, I've been in touch with a lot of the transition towns within London, and I know some have that same issue, because we keep attracting the same people. We want to broaden our reach as well. So Rhiannon, so happy, you joined the team. Another problem was elitism, and that's in terms of brand environmentalism. And next we have the master's tool. I'll go into these just a little bit in detail after this slide. And now, one of the biggest things I kept hearing from Black and brown people within Brixton as to why they weren't coming to our meetings or joining our initiatives and so on, was that we have bigger fish to fry. We have bigger fish to fry, more important things, more pressing things to deal with. So if we look at communications, as I said, there's 432 here, but it's a lot more than that. Yeah, have you heard of Transition Town Brixton? 432 was 9%. I've looked at over 600, and the interesting thing is that a lot of the initiatives that we have, for example, Brixton Pound, Brixton Energy, and so on, actually have attracted more attention on their own than as a movement. And in a way, that is what we're set up to do, to catalyze the emergence of these initiatives, and then for them to run on their own. So it's not too surprising, but I think we could still penetrate the community a lot better. And yeah, we need to sort of up our game in that respect. Okay, when we look at the issue of elitism, what is often and this is a charge that is not just leveled at transition, but also almost every other environmental movement. And the charge is that environmental movements tend to be middle class white people, who have the time and space, and ability, wherewithal to campaign to be environmentalists. And elitism breaks into three categories when I analyzed. Sorry. So we have compositional elitism, which suggests that environmentalists are drawn from privileged socioeconomic strata, which I just spoke about that. Ideological elitism suggests that the aims of environmentalists and environmental reforms are a subterfuge for distributing benefits, the benefits that would accrue to environmentalists like ourselves, and the costs to others. Then we have impact elitism, which suggests that the environmental reforms, whether intentionally or not, do in fact have regressive social impact. And this is something that really resonated with Black and brown people, or emanated from Black and brown people within Brixton. That's okay, so you guys have enough money to do what you're doing and so on and so forth, but you want us to sort of cut back on what we're doing, and no, it's not going to happen. The other interesting conversation that seemed to emerge from Black people, and I repeat that, from Black people, particularly Black Africans, was what I've called the master's tools and the development of underdevelopment. So the argument there was that environmentalists and environmentalism is calling for underdeveloped countries or less developed countries not to develop, not to exploit their natural resources, not to exploit their oil and so on and so forth, and therefore they will perpetually remain underdeveloped. And so some people saw environmentalism as furthering that agenda, which of course is not true. if we look at degrowth as a theory, degrowth doesn't argue that developing countries should stop exploiting their natural resources. The premise of degrowth is that, you know, developed countries like ours here, or in any part of the Western world should, you know, should curb their consumption. Now, the bigger fish to fry, well, yeah, this I called a blockchain of durable inequality. So we have issues. So these are really pertinent issues that affect the everyday life experiences of many Black and brown people in Brixton and wider London. And, you know, in fact, I don't think there are any planetary boundaries to this blockchain of durable inequalities, as we've seen in things that are happening in the United States, and also, for example, police brutality in France and also Belgium. Blockchain of durable inequalities suggests that these issues that, and that is the media, I'll go into them very briefly afterwards, media, education, health, housing, income inequality, and also the police and criminal justice system. These things don't work on their own, you know, they work together in tandem, you know, that's why you've got the cogs there, and yeah, and they form this blockchain that's Black and brown people feel sort of affect their everyday life experiences, thus stopping them from joining our movement. So education, I'm not going to read all this out because I'm aware that if a couple of people have to leave, or 3 people have to leave, so I'm just going to go through this very quickly. So education, there is inequality in the education pipeline for particularly Black and brown people, and this actually is within secondary schools. It's behavior. It's quarantine, that's behavior, and then beyond secondary school into higher education, it becomes an attainment gap. Ethnicity pay gap again. Most minority ethnic groups earn less on average than white British people, though some groups earn more, and so on. You know, there are always exceptions to the rule, so to speak. Housing, again, housing policy is known to disadvantage BME groups. Now, I should have said at the beginning that I don't generally tend to use the phrase BME or BAME, and I don't use color or people of color. I just normally use racially marginalized groups as a general nomenclature for that group of people, only because, I mean, I think colored or people of color speaks to issues of power within society, if that makes sense. We can talk about it in the conversation hereafter. Health, you know, there are a lot of health discrepancies, and COVID has exposed the stark inequalities that exist within our society immensely. You know, I don't have the figures right here because I finished writing the thesis before COVID. Media coverage, you know, if sometimes I wonder if people sort of people see or hear what's a lot of Black people see or hear sort of with media coverage. So, for example, if and I know this applies to many Black families, if there's some sort of violent attack or something, you know, reported either in the newspaper or on TV, almost every Black family I know, the first thing they think of is, oh, please God, don't let us be a Black person, you know, for example, because we've become conditioned almost to think that Black on Black crime and so on is so prevalent. Yes, there are issues of it, but it's not, you know, you never get some white on white crime being reported in the same way, and that is obviously unjust. And it perpetuates a certain narrative about Black and brown people as well. Now, the police and criminal justice system, I have a lot to say about this, and I wrote a lot about it, but again, I'm not going to go too much into detail. The graph I've just provided there at the bottom shows you, you know, stark inequalities, you know, from September 2019 to October 2019 to September 2020, and it's crazy. What all this does. What all this does, it means that Black and brown people often, and before I carry on, I should state that the darker you are, the starker the oppression. So, you know, the blacker you are, the more sort of oppression you get in many respects. what this does is creates almost a hostile environment for a lot of people. And I will talk about this in a bit more detail in our conversation after. So based on the bigger fish to fry, the blockchain of durable inequalities, it is quite easy to see, and also, of course, following on from George Floyd's killing on the 25th of May, it is quite evident that the argument for Black Lives Matter, and within cities, within inner city districts like Brixton, and within cities in general, multicultural cities, what you will generally find is that an orientation towards collective action on behalf of one's group, and by one's group I mean group by social identity or social location, an orientation towards one's group is a common feature. Okay, so then the question becomes, and this is the question that I think interests a lot of people here. How can we better engage with others within our communities? Yeah, I had Black there before, but I wanted to broaden it out and make it others, because obviously some people are in rural areas, but even within rural areas, you get othering as well, And put differently, we can then ask, how can we build solidarity across differences, and what can we learn from other movements past and present? And there are a lot of things we can learn from other movements past and present. Well, to start with, just for clarity of purpose, the argument that that we depart from as environmentalists, that all lives matter, is then debunked by or challenged by the argument of Black Lives Matter, because what Black people are saying is that we're facing these things every day. Yes, environmentalists may talk about parts per million of greenhouse gases, that will affect the atmosphere, or that will affect us, either today or in some near future. But Black people are feeling these pressures every day. It's not parts per million of greenhouse gases, it's parts per million of oppression, so to speak. And of course, I'm generalizing here. I'm not talking about all Black and brown people. No, there are, people who don't feel that, but I would say quite a significant majority of people, of Black and brown people, feel the negative effects, shall we say. So I have this quote here from James Baldwin, which I think is interesting in terms of guiding us into how we build solidarity across differences. So we can have our differences. We can disagree and still love each other, unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. And I think that's a good starting point to start to talk about how we can build solidarity and how we can move forward as a movement in multicultural settings. Just give me 1 second. The next part I wanted to read to you, because I thought it was quite important. Okay, so to inquire why environmental movements are so predominantly white is first of all to bring race matters to the fore. And that means it is to highlight not only the many ways race intersects with environmental activism, but also to question the way human societies have been and continue to be organized. Questioning that means drawing our attention to challenge the colorblind promises that we as environmentalists generally have. So all lives matter is a truism, yes, but in the course of recent human history, it has been implicitly colonized by a color-coded white over Black ideology that underpins notions of white supremacy. So all lives matter is a truism that is yet to be, and yet it must be. On that basis, I kind of make no apologies for bringing race to the fore in my research and the discussions that we will perhaps have. So as a movement, what I would say, for transition is that we should not and must not abstain from grappling with uncomfortable issues such as race. So in that respect, it's absolutely important from time to time to engage in a dose of critical self-inventory, because if we are unwilling to expose ourselves or our ideas as individuals or as a group to some scrutiny and criticism, both internal and external, then we will not grow or succeed. So our positive visioning for a world transformed must transcend the immediate embrace of puritanical dogma and loyalty to sort of ideological soulmates within our in-groups. Put differently, we must be willing and able to move beyond our comfort zones and, when necessary, constructively criticize each other and our secondary or tertiary objectives and methods without descending into spasms of factionalism, which is what in many instances brings about the terminal decline of movements. So as a movement driven by profound notions of community sustainability and resilience, we will not grow beyond a certain plateau or succeed if we only preach to the converted in echo chambers. That is why the groundwork of community engagement and organizing is so important. And that's why I'm really happy that, again, we've got Catherine. We've recognized the issue. We've got Catherine and Navigate on board, to help us sort of address these wide-ranging issues. And yes, I look at race in particular because I identify that as the primary mediator of engagement within transition in Brixton. But in other settings, where race is not an issue, we have class and various other forms of social identity being barriers to full participation within our movements, and we must confront that. We must address that. And it's really important. I think transition, as a movement, we've made excellent strides in terms of recognizing these issues and sort of, I wouldn't say embracing them, but taking them wholly on board and say, okay, right, we're going to deal with it. The paper written by Sarah, and she informed me by email that she got help from others, was absolutely brilliant. And it's almost had me welling up when I read it, because I didn't expect that from transition to so recognize this issue that I have been sort of looking at for so long and thought was a big barrier to greater participation within the movement. Now I'll just talk about a couple of reflections, and then we'll open up and have some conversations, because I think we've probably lost a couple of people already. Sorry about that. Okay, so I've listed some points here. I'm going to go through them very quickly. Uganda. Now, as part of my research, my research was self-funded, so I also worked for my department, and as part of it, I was tutoring master's students, and we used to go on field trips to Uganda every year. Of course, this year or last year we didn't go because of COVID, but what I did then was in Uganda to work within communities, to try and help marginalized communities sort of have a right to the city, so to speak. And this ties in with the work I'm doing here, with my research, because within Uganda, or within those marginalized communities, there wasn't that much difference in terms of social identity or social location, but there was still belonging and othering. So it's sort of helped me understand and appreciate how to bring people together, how to try and find common interests to bring people together. Now, we talk a lot within environmentalism, and this has become even more prominent since XR sort of swarmed the Overton window. We talk a lot about regenerative cultures, but I think we should talk a lot more about regenerative communities. Yes, when we talk about regenerative, I often think that we frame it within just the environment, just within ecology, but we need to regenerate relations within and between ourselves, within our community. And it's a very, looking at race as my area of focus, it's a very low entry point to find out what's Black and brown people or any other set of people within your locality would be concerned about. Number one, if you look on the internet, about different local groups and what they're doing, very easy to find out, and you can connect to local groups in that way. That is a very increasingly more important way of connecting with different groups within localities. And again, thanks that Rhiannon has joined us. Absolutely wonderful. Now, when we connect with different groups, we shouldn't seek to assimilate the different groups. We should recognize differences and appreciate and celebrate the differences. We can't come together. There's so many things, so many more things that sort of we have in common than that which separates us. So we should seek to learn from each other, you know, and empathy is absolutely crucial in that enterprise. What I found out in my research, and that kind of surprised, well, I say surprised me, it surprised me a bit, but most of the Black and brown people, and particularly the Black people that I spoke to, did not visit national parks within the country because they did not feel almost welcome. It's very difficult to explain, but it's I mean, personally, from my personal experience, if I go outside London or to the countryside somewhere, and I'm the only Black person within walking in the streets, and I feel people looking at me, you feel kind of a bit awkward, you know. It's natural, you know. And so anyway, a lot of Black and brown people don't engage with national parks, and so there's almost a duality of citizenship there, which is very interesting. And I think, you know, Dorsetto Taylor wrote about that some time ago, but that's in the US setting. The talk, oops, sorry, I'm trying to move along very quickly. The talk, now, almost, well, I say 90% of Black parents I know often have the talk with their kids around about 10, 11 or 12. And what that talk involves is telling their children that, look, you are different from most people. You're gonna have to work harder to get you're gonna have to work twice as hard, you know, in terms of school to get half as far as your white counterparts. And it's very saddening to hear this, you know. And some people have said, no, that this is Black parents instilling their own fears within their children. And there might be some arguments to be had from that, but it is this hostile environment that people feel a lot of the time. Now, appropriate adaptation in a hostile environment. I'll tell you very quickly about that. So I showed you a picture of my daughter at the very beginning when she was born. When she was about 5 or 6, we used to walk around, and she goes, my gosh, Dad, well, she didn't say my gosh, she said, Dad, you know a lot of people? And I said, yeah, because I used to say hi to everyone. When she got to about 7 or 8, she noticed, she goes, Daddy, I've noticed that a lot of the people that you're saying hello to and nodding to and so on and so forth, a lot of them are Black. Why is that? And then I had to sit her down and give her the precursor to the talk. I said, okay, so I'm just recognizing these people. You are in an environment that perhaps, you know, might not be welcoming, or, you know, you might, but I see you. Basically what I'm doing, nodding to people, is I see you. And to be honest, I do that to almost everyone. I'm that kind of person. I just walk around, and if you make eye contact with me, I will nod to you. I will give you a smile and hope you have a nice day. You know, I won't say that to you, but yeah, anyway. So that's sort of recognition, that unspoken recognition that Black people have. That is what I call appropriate adaptation in a hostile environment, because this hostile environment is drummed into us through the media, through the ages, and so on and so forth, in various ways. And it's unsurprising to have that. There's been a pandemic of racism for centuries. You know, a lot of the environmental effects or the environmental degradation that we have at the moment was predicated on exploitation of Black and brown countries around the world. Simple. Now, many people have argued that the world is a better place, but as Malcolm X said, you know, you don't stab me with a 6-inch knife and then pull it out halfway and tell me, you know, it's better. It's not better, you know. It's not completely better. It never will, really, because we are, you know, this is the world. But we must, I think, keep our positive energy, and this is what attracts most people, or attracted me, and, you know, to transition. And in fact, I didn't say before, although we didn't have a lot of diversity within our open project nights per se, you know, where we had it in a particular place, and, you know, invite people along, you know, do as many call outs as possible. Our projects, for example, Brixton Energy, Incredible Edible, Lambeth, and Remakery, our projects actually are very diverse, because the projects go out into the community. They go out, they don't do like we do in terms of our open project nights and open our doors and say, everybody come in. Because when Black and brown people walk past the door and they see, I don't know, 20 white faces within the space, oh no, okay, no, sorry, I'm not gonna come in today, thank you. the way to build the way to build solidarity within the community is to try and establish some common interests within various groups. And as I said, I think, you know, reaching out to various groups at this particular moment in time, it's you know, it's a very, very low entry point, you know, in terms of digitally anyway. And when we are allowed to go out again, it's, I mean, Rich and Tooting, I think that does this quite well, sort of reaching out to different, particularly Muslim communities within Tooting. So again, this is something we can and we should learn from each other. We should not try to seek a collective identity because, you know, this is what I talked about earlier, you know, in terms of assimilation. We should not try to assimilate, you know, different groups, you know, because that presupposes that we have the answer, so we are the better group and so on. The key thing is to try and get people concerned about the issues within your locality. If you get them to be concerned, then the next issue then is to translate concern to action, and then they will join you. I've talked quite a lot. I've got still got a bit to say, but I'm going to stop there because it's 11:15.